So thank you so much for having us today. We appreciate it. So we'll start off with an icebreaker. And hey, Ken, why is the smartphone wearing glasses? Okay, yeah, because it lost its contacts. Figure start off with a dad joke. So why don't we get started?
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so as we know, attacks are increasing in number and sophistication. Everyone's heard of Target and Sony. But you don't hear you don't hear about the attacks in state and local government as much. But Blue Voyant had issued a report that there was a 50% increase in events in 2020. We don't have enough security professionals in the space, and which means that we need a new paradigm shift, and that's really built on zero trust. So as I said. So these events they total like nearly $4 million per year in 2020. I mean, you see, I'm sure you've all seen the statistics in the news. But what was interesting out of this is that just last month Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, went to the White House to visit with President Biden and his cabinet to talk about how we could help with the cybersecurity, and he was just one among many of these technology CEOs that participated. But the end result is, historically, Microsoft has been investing $1 billion per year in cybersecurity. We have over 4,200 professionals. And going forward, we're going to invest $20 billion in the next 5 years, and also help out federal, state, and local government customers on their journey towards improving their posture with security. And so, at the end of the day, if you don't do your due diligence, you might you might have to send out one of these letters, which it's probably the most expensive negative PR campaign that you'll ever go through. It's expensive. It kind of it damages your reputation, it erodes trust with your services, and you could be better off. You'd be better off doing other things. And then phishing. So phishing is the cheapest attack. So these nefarious individuals, the hackers, they're getting a big bang for their buck. So as you can see on this slide, so the cost of phishing is inexpensive, but the reward, the payout is quite high. So they really leverage, gravitate towards phishing, and we've got a number of tools that can help protect you and your organization. And with that being said, Ken, you want to kind of tack on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tony. This is one of the things that and all I do is talk to state and local government customers, and I've been with Microsoft 13 years, and a lot of things have changed with the pandemic, and we are in a different world, and the way that we look at security really has fundamentally changed. Now we're in this new normal of hybrid. People are working from different places, and a lot of our customers have said they've gone through 5 years of roadmap in the last 18 months because they've had to make this quick shift to enable telework and other ways for people to continue to be productive. And phishing has doubled, or actually tripled, in the last year because it's easy. The slide shows it doesn't really cost a whole lot of money. Your cost to get in is minimal, but the reward is high. And the way we have to protect this is we look at the identity as the new security perimeter, and we'll talk about that as we go through the zero trust conversation. So Tony, if you can go to the next slide. And not only is it that phishing, right? All we have to do is get someone to click on a link. So we have to have new ways to be able to look at behaviors and the way that people interact with technology, right? We don't have the advantage of assuming that everyone's on a managed device that we have control over, that we can manage the policies and the software. But the attacks have gotten more sophisticated and more complex, right? We're not in the, our father's days of security where someone would, attach a, a piece of malware to an email. We would be able to detect it. We'd update the signatures and we'd move on. Now we're looking at very complex social engineering type attacks where there isn't anything being written to the disk. There's nothing to detect, but it's just someone's behavior, or someone goes to a website and downloads something, to these more complex, whaling attacks or spear phishing attacks where, these are well-crafted emails with phishing lures attached to them that are targeting people or coming from people that we would normally trust, from commissioners, VIPs, HR. So the way that we have to detect and respond to these has also changed, and that's what's led to a lot of the fundamental shift in the way that we approach cybersecurity. So Tony, if you can go to the next slide. So it really comes down to, some fundamental things, right? The idea of think before you click. And this is something that we've engineered and we've built into all of our cybersecurity trainings over the years and user awareness. But it's not as easy as that anymore. Telling people to hover over an email and see, if you don't recognize the link, don't click on it. Now we have domain spoofing. We have, users being impersonated, but we're also responding. And I like to think of security as a game of chess, right? We'll think of something, we'll put in new protections, and then the bad guys will think of something else. So it really comes down to the user at this point. And when we talk about the user, we're talking about that identity, and the identity has become the fundamental security perimeter. It used to be our firewalls and our VPNs and other things that we have control over. Now it's the user, right? What these nation states, these coordinated attacks want is they want to get a compromised identity because that allows them to get inside of an organization, right? And they bypass all of these other protections that we would have in place. So Tony, if you can go to the next slide. And this has gotten really hard, right? So we like to use the term we're in this hybrid environment where some people may be coming back to work and working from an office, or we're in part-time situations. We'll make, some customers refer to as I'm in a permanent hybrid mode, right? We're never going to have everybody back in the office. So how we're doing our work, how people are accessing our applications and our data is not the same. Right? We have multiple devices, we have multiple networks, we have different applications, and all of it still requires that we have protection for this identity. And that leads us to this idea of zero trust, right? And from a Microsoft perspective, this is what we built into our security platform. And that's really what we have as a security platform. And a lot of my job is helping customers understand where Microsoft has come in these 13 years that I started, right? When I started, security wasn't really built into the platform. It was bolt on, an antivirus solution, to now we have this very complex cloud environment with all kinds of signaling and applications and online services running, and our customers are part of that as well. And we have to enable protection for them. So Tony, if you can go to the next slide. So there's really three things that we talk about when we think about zero trust, right? One is that we are going to require a user to authenticate themselves every time, right? And it's, it used to be trust but verify. Now we're really talking about trust nothing and verify every time. That's what we're looking at, because no matter where that person is logging in, we can't guarantee that those credentials or that user has been compromised at some point along the way, right? Remember I said the idea of a phishing attack is to is to get compromised credentials, because then they are that person. They're inside your network. And when we look at some of the attacks, and Tony mentioned some of them, these happen inside, your network for hundreds of days, right? Depending on what, statistic you read. But they have that identity, and they can then start to look at and map out and figure out where the, where the good stuff is, because they've authenticated as that user. If we are able to trust that that person may have been compromised, we force them to re-authenticate or revalidate who they are, we can stop them at some point. The other thing is, from an identity perspective, we really have to get into the idea of, I only need the administrative or the privileges I need to do what I need to do at that time, right? We have, we have the idea of people being domain administrators or, global administrators on a cloud platform. So they are a target. However, if we can design a system, and that's some of the things that we talk about when we talk about zero trust, is I'm only going to give you what you need to do your job and then take it away. That way, if you are compromised, to the bad guy or to whoever's trying to get inside your network, you're not a target because you don't have those escalated privileges. You only have them for the period of time that you need them. The other thing that we talk about is one of our tenets, is that we just have to assume that we're breached, right? We can have the best network, we can have everything turned on, but we just have to assume that someone's inside of our network, right? They're flying low, underneath the radar. They're doing slow mapping commands. They're looking to see who's the privileged users. They're not generating a lot of traffic. They're not noisy, but they're there. So we just have to assume that something's going on, and we have to build in those protections to detect those type of behaviors, those anomalous activities that are going on. So these really make up the way Microsoft approaches zero trust. So Tony, if you have anything you add, or we can go on to the next slide, but we can continue to discuss this. So zero trust has become almost a marketing term, right? Transformation, all these other things that we hear, and zero trust is is right up there with them. But zero trust is not something that Microsoft invented, right? This comes from NIST. This is a well documented standard publication that comes from from NIST. And what we've done is incorporated that into how we approach that, right? And that NIST talks about from zero trust is one permission, one resource, right? We have to have some type of way to check every time someone is looking to access data, an application. We call that conditional access. With that, when we basically look at things like the user state, the device state, have they been compromised? Has something happened since the last time that you made a request? And that conditional access is one of the big parts of Microsoft's approach to zero trust. The other thing is that we take a dynamic approach to authentication, right? We're not going to just allow you to log in and have carte blanche to whatever you need. In the old days, right? You would come in, you would log into your domain from a computer in your office, and you get a token, and you be able to go wherever you need to go, because we trust that you're inside our network. You're behind our firewall. You have all of our GPO policies as part of Active Directory. That's not the case anymore, right? People are logging in from all over the place. So we have to have a new way to look at how these users are authenticated and trust that they are who they say they are. I don't know if you can go to the next one. So this is the publication. NIST, 800-207. I know Eric, all the security guys are familiar with all of these NIST publications. But if you really want to dive into zero trust, it's out there. It's 207. You can take a look at it. That's where we're pulling all of these recommendations that we're talking about, and how we built them into our security solutions. So we mentioned these three tenets, right? And I talked a little bit about which pieces are part of that, right? verify explicitly, we're taking into account all of this signaling, right? We talked about, the device. Is the device healthy? Is the user who they say they are? Have they responded to multi-factor authentication? We also have to look at what are they accessing, right? Because that's important too, right? If Ken, who's already logged in, is all of a sudden trying to access data on a contractor server, why is he doing that, right? That's something that we need to double check. That that's not something that Ken really should be doing. So we look at that behavior, and we look for those type of anomalies in that verified stage of our process. The other thing is that I want to make sure that I don't have more than I need, right? Anybody, and this is very typical for a lot of our state and local government customers, right? They've been at a place for more than a couple of years, especially in IT. I kind of moved on from one project to another. Now I'm in a different role, maybe on a different team, but I'm carrying with me a lot of those previous database, permissions, or I had access to this application or other things just because of my role. So I may have more privilege than I need to do my job. So again, going back to that identity of being able to pare down and really compartmentalize what access do I need when I need it, right? That's part of that zero trust piece. And then we already talked about this assumed breach, right? We just have to assume that something's in our net. We have to be reactive. We have to know and say, all right, I need to look at everything that's happening. I have to look and see traffic. And we can do that because now we have the ability to pull in all of this telemetry that Microsoft shares across our security stack. So we're looking at behavior. We're looking at, abnormal access, weird travel, right? Why are people logging in at different times in different places? We have to assume that there's something going on, right? And that's our assumed breach approach. This is what a high level looks of the way Microsoft approaches it. We have 6 different pillars that we look at. We've talked about the identity, right? That's our security perimeter. We want to secure that identity. We want to be able to look at things like conditional access, enable multi-factor. The device is another important part of this as well, right? Because depending on what that device is, we may want to restrict what happens, right? If that's not something that the state manages and we have control over, if this is someone's personal iPad or phone, maybe we want to allow them to access the data, but they can't store anything there, right? I don't have control over that. So the device factors into this zero trust conversation as well, because I want to make sure that not only is the user secure, but the data and the applications that they have access to. Then we go over to the data, right? So that's the other thing. We're accessing constituent information. It may be PII data. It may be financial data. How is that access being regulated, right? Where can I go with that data? What can I do with it, right? These are other things that we have to build into our zero trust policy, because there's a lot of ifs now, right? In this permanent hybrid world that we're in, we have to be able to build into our policies that data. And then applications. So this is another important consideration too when we talk about this hybrid world that we're in, because someone may be working from home or a network that we don't manage. So I need to make sure that they still have access to the applications that they need, and everyone is not logging in over a VPN. So how do we give our users access to those applications, right? So that application management and availability is another factor that we have to look at. And we have to make sure that they only can do what we want them to do with those applications. Again, do we want them to be able to save documents, print documents? Do we want to give them browser access only to that application, depending on the signaling that we get back on their device, those type of areas. And then we talk about the infrastructure and the network as well. We have to look at what traffic is going, where are these devices being accessed. So all of these pillars factor into our zero trust piece, and we can look at individual solutions and how we protect each one of those. We won't go into a lot of that today, but this is something that I'm happy to arrange follow-up calls or deep dive calls afterwards to talk more about this, because this is really a fundamental change for Microsoft, and a lot of our customers aren't aware that we have this level of solution now, that we built this out over the last couple of years. So I can go on. So let's look at the workplace, right? So we talked about this hybrid environment, right? That not everyone's working from one place anymore. So how do we make sure that people can still be productive, but still be secured? So we talked about the remote access, right? We have to be able to give users and workers what they need, but we need to be able to do it over a variety of different conditions. So that whether that's webifying, applications. So we have ways that we can enable on-premise applications, make them available to workers through a web browser. We have technology that can do that. We can consolidate all of their application access into one place, so that they only have to click on an icon to see what's available to them, and those applications can be delivered by policy. We can also give them the ability to self-manage their identity, look at their logins or their sign-ins and say, wait a minute, that wasn't me. So give some deeper insight into what they're doing. And then we talked about the device piece, right? We want to allow people to have the freedom to work on different devices, but each one of those devices, they're not all considered equal, right? Depending on whether it's a Windows-based device, it's an Android device, it's an iOS device. We want to be able to put different policies around what you can do with those based on the level of security that we deem from that. And then we talked about the corporate resources, right? Different ways to be able to do that. So Tony, if you can go to the next slide. So when we look at that, a couple of things really come into play, right? We talked about strong authentication. So because we don't manage where that user's logging in from, we have to increase or level up, the way that we verify that person. So username and password is one way, but that's probably at the bottom. We're looking at now password lists, so we're taking advantage of more beefed up hardware. We can look at things like Windows Hello, where we can use biometric face information or PIN information to provide another way for that user to re-verify themselves every time. We're also looking at other things like FIDO, if you're familiar with FIDO devices, which are USB-based devices that people can carry around with them. We have applications like Authenticator that they can look at type in a code to validate who they are. This doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? One of the things that we can do with conditional access is we can say, if you're logging in from a device that we know on a network that we manage, I'll take your trust. If you're logging in from someplace else, we could have these adaptive policies that say, okay, before you download that or you access an application that maybe is an HR application or has payroll information, I'm going to challenge you with multi-factor authentication. Then we get into devices. We've already talked about some of that, but how do we manage those devices? We have a couple of interesting things that we can do. We can actually manage the device, just like a typical mobile management solution, or we have ways that we can say, I want to respect that this is a person's own device, and they may have things on there that we don't really need any access to, like vacation pictures or personal emails. We can manage what we consider the business or work applications and say, okay, you can use that device, but we're going to install Outlook or any other work application, and we're going to keep that inside of that work world. right? So I can't cut and paste information out of a work application and put it on Twitter or do other things, save it outside of our our work applications. So it gives us the flexibility to say, okay, I'm going to allow some flexibility on the device, but you can only do certain things with it. Right, we already talked about the adaptive policies, where depending on where you are, and we can look at it like if-then statements, saying if you're logging in from this network, do this, or if you're risk, right? Because we can look at that user in the background and say, wait a minute, he's logging in at weird times. He's never done this before. This is out of the ordinary. We can set his user risk, and we can base policies on that user risk. So if when Ken goes to log into the network, his risk level is high, then I can say he's got to change his password, or he needs to use multi-factor authentication. Or if his risk is fine, we'll let him through. And then the other thing is, how do we restrict or manage what a user has access to, right? What applications? And this goes back to that idea of least privilege. So I know I'm covering a lot of information. Is any questions so far, or am I going too fast? Tony, I don't know if there's been any questions or anything. So just
I haven't seen any.
No questions. Thank you.
great.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, so let's talk about that strong authentication. And I mentioned some of this, but when we look at the attacks that have happened, right, 99% of them are, come from phishing type attacks, or other areas where the user's credentials have been compromised. We could prevent almost all of them by adding another layer of authentication, right? Multi-factor. So this way, if the user's identity has been compromised and they try and present themselves as the user, if we enable multi-factor, then they don't have the phone, they don't have the other device to provide that. So we can use that information like a failed multi-factor login as ways to detect that something is going on. And if we make it easier for users, multi-factor doesn't have to be so intrusive, right? We can use things like Windows Hello, a FIDO key where they plug it in, a simple, a password, or a PIN. There's a wide variety of ways that we can, enable this. So there are other things that we can factor in. Microsoft can incorporate all of these into the user profile. So every time they go to present themselves based on a conditional access policy or risk level, we can decide what we need to do. Go on. Tony, can you go to the next slide? Okay. Yep. And then we talked about the compliant devices. So when we are looking at the identity, they're logging in from a device. One of the things that makes this really interesting from a Microsoft perspective is underneath all of our security solutions is we have what we call the intelligent security graph. And that's what really drives our integrated security platform. Right? We're looking at telemetry from billions of Azure Active Directory logins. We're looking at information from Office 365. We're getting new detections from our Defender products that, and machines that live in Azure, even with Windows Update. And we're able to take that information and share it across our platform. And this is one of the things that I think is really compelling to our customers when they take a look at the way Microsoft approaches is we don't have a lot of single purpose applications running, right? Not just a spam solution, not just a single sign-on, but we're sharing that information with all of the other applications, and more importantly, with everyone else that runs on our platform. So this device data, as we detect new pieces of malware on machines, we can use all of this to be able to drive decisions, whether that's on the user or whether that's on the device space. And all of this can be used with conditional access, right? Is Ken trying to save an Excel spreadsheet on machine that we've never seen before, we're not going to let them have it. Is it a managed machine? Is it an application that we manage? Then I'll allow them to save it, but I won't allow them to move it anywhere else outside of that. We can also pull into this device platform if you're using classification, right? Confidential labeling, that's part of our solution as well, or even just endpoint protection. Can't even go on. So this is what I've been alluding to throughout this conversation, is this idea of conditional access, and the other term is adaptive access, meaning every time someone is going to present themselves for access to something, we're going to look at a bunch of individual signals, right? That sign-in risk that I talked about. Are they logging in from someplace they haven't logged in before? Right? Is this somewhere when we have seen that? What's the user risk, right? We protect the identities that live within our Azure Active Directory, and we have a feature called identity protection. So we're monitoring in the background all of the dark web, all of those breaches. And if one of your identities becomes available in one of those breaches, say someone goes to Target and signs up for a Target value card with their state credentials, and there's a breach, and then we detect that, we can now set their user risk as elevated and use that in a policy to determine whether they have access to something. We talked about the device state, the platform. What platform are they logging in from? Maybe we want to have Windows devices have a different platform than the mobile. You can't do something on iOS, but if you're on a Windows machine, you can do that. All of these different signals can be used to drive that decision whether we want to allow them to have access. Then we can say, not only are we deciding to give them access, but what to do with that, right? Do we want to limit their access? Do we want to block them? Do we want to make them reset their password? All of these things can be used to drive that decision at that point in time. So Tony, if you want to go on. This is the other component, right, to that identity piece of how do users get access, right? What if they need access to a new application? That whole user life cycle, right? How do they get provisioned? Does it come from HR? Right? When do they get their Outlook, their email credentials? And then as they move through the organization, how do we manage that policy? What do they, they no longer work in HR, so we take away HR applications, and now they work in auditing or health. We can drive all of that based on their entitlements, what they have access, and also we build into this a way to review that on a regular basis. One of the things that we have is an access review. We can automate that process. So from a compliance standpoint, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, I need to look at everyone who's global admin access. Do they still need it? Why do they still need it? And provide that from a from a checkoff perspective, which helps a lot of our customers with compliance, and especially if they're trying to meet different regulations. Have that automated access review is important. Okay, any questions on the user experience?
So, Ken, there is a question around what options are available for us to protect apps and data when a user, say a professor in this case, work from their personal laptop. How can we do that essentially without joining their device, their personal device, to our Windows domain?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's one of those things that I talked about, where we don't want to necessarily get into managing everybody's device, but we want to give them access to applications. So we have a way of associating what we consider to be work applications, right? Outlook, PowerPoint, Teams, those, and we can designate those as work applications. Now, when a user logs in from a device to access that, we can say, okay, since they're logging into a work application, we're going to challenge them with multi-factor authentication. That's a decision. And we can contain the information that that user is accessing within that application to that work sphere, I guess, or container. So yes, that's a common scenario that a lot of our customers are looking at it. So that's that's definitely within the realm of possibility, and we can follow up, and if there's more information needed, happy to do that. But a very common scenario, especially in this new hybrid world that we're in. Are there any other questions?
That was all right now.
Okay.
Hey, so just a thought, Ken. So, a lot of these services that you're talking about, like multi-factor authentication and conditional access. I mean, the benefit of a cloud-based solution is that you can customize it. You don't have to I mean, you can configure it. You don't have to customize it, build it on premises. So, how easy is it to enable some of these services like multi-factor and conditional access for an organization?
Yeah, so for the most part, there's not anything that needs to be deployed, right? We don't have to set servers up or create new infrastructure. It's a matter of configuring that from the cloud. From the user endpoint, there really isn't anything that's going to impact their day-to-day experience. No agents or things that need to be installed. Just their authentication experience may change, right? They may have to answer a question or respond to a multi-factor challenge. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot. I like to say that the technology is a lot of times the easy part. The hard part is creating the policy, right? Because there's business decisions and politics and compliance things that need to be factored in. But the technology is not usually is not a big factor.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's move into the other side, right? We talked about the user area. From an IT perspective, right, we want to make sure that we allow users to have access to the applications they need. They still need to do their job. We want to make it easy. But now in this new hybrid world, we don't have that water cooler cube experience. We need to be able to still allow folks to collaborate, share, and be able to work together to get their jobs done. So go to the next slide, Tony. So this is some of the things that we talked about before, right? We want to be able to give them a single sign-on experience. And the way that we can do that is if we can put everything in one place so that applications that get lit up based on their role or as they move throughout the organization, they don't have to go to different places looking for icons or how do I access this application. Have one place that is, what they see is based on what they're entitled to, and also I just have to click on it, right? Once we've authenticated, we allow them to have access to it. If their request goes to someplace else that requires another decision, we can reevaluate that. But then also, because everyone is working from different places, we want to give them as much power to reset their passwords, to look at what they have access to, request new applications or changes to those. The other thing is that we also want to make sure that we aren't restricting the way that people work. So there are opportunities where we may have to work with outside contractors, right? So we may need to allow other people into our collaborative experience, different vendors, maybe constituents, other types of people that all have to be enabled through this. We can do all of that through our identity experience. Go to the next one, Tony. So this is one of the big ones, right? We have this concept at Microsoft where we can work with your organization and your hardware vendors to say, okay, if someone needs a new laptop, I don't require them to come into the office to pick it up because maybe they can't, right? We call this our autopilot, where I could say, okay, Ken's going to start on Monday. We can FedEx him his laptop. He turns it on. We can set up a autopilot procedure. So as soon as he logs in, as soon as he puts his credentials in, we take over and say, here's what's got to be provisioned, here's what's got to be set up, here's what policies have to be applied. We can take that out of the box experience and totally tailor it to your organization. So we don't have to have people driving in or on the phone with the help desk for 4 hours trying to figure out how to get access to something. We can manage all of this from from one place and based on the user. Again, this goes back to the identity. So Tony, if we can go to the next slide. This is what I was talking about from a single sign-on perspective. They have an actual application portal that they can customize. Here's the applications that you have access to. So I can log in once to this application portal, have access to the applications that I need. We can group them into different groups. They can set it up however they like. This gives them one place to go. This is also reflective of the applications that they have access to. So if they don't need it anymore, then they don't see it. Okay, Tony, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think what's important here is that we can also stack the solutions together. So you single sign-on with Azure Active Directory. Then you can also tie in the MFA and the conditional access policies with it.
Right, and that's a great point, Tony. This is not just for Microsoft applications, right? This is all of the applications that your users may use. Users may use. Great. So this is what it looks like from the application portal too. They also have the ability to look at their own profile. I mentioned being able to see their most recent sign-ins. So if they recognize something that they haven't done, they can let someone know. Also, they can do user maintenance, request applications. Again, this is all driven by the policy that you put around that identity. And then when we talk about that partner or vendor experience, we have a way to allow that collaboration. We have a different experience for businesses where we can set up permissions or roles within our Active Directory without creating new accounts. We call this our B2B, business to business. And then there's also another experience for B2C consumers, constituents, where they can take advantage of their Facebook, Twitter, other identity that they may want to bring so that we don't have to set up a whole new registration experience for them to have access to our applications. So
yeah, I think this is a very we don't talk about this as much as we should, Ken. It seems like this is a very powerful solution. I mean, I remember back in the days when I was in industry, where we had to extend access to our business partners and our customers. I mean, we pretty much had to stand up a separate Active Directory and kind of just set up the trust to grant access to the applications. And with Azure Active Directory today, it just seems like it's so seamless.
Yep. Okay, go to the next one. So this is really what we talk about and what we covered from a zero trust. I purposely didn't want to dive into all the different solutions and different ways that we can do that. But this is something that from a security approach, this is how Microsoft is looking at that, right? We have our identities and endpoints. Each one of those needs to be managed individually and be able to give users access to resources. But we have to have this security policy or this real-time enforcement to give them access to the data, the applications, all because we know that there's these attacks that are coming with more frequency, more sophistication, and they're just getting easier and easier. And we as much as we want to drive user awareness and security protocols and hygiene for users, there's still ways that we can get in. So we want to fundamentally use zero trust as part of the way that we approach it. So, okay, so in summary, right, we talked about identity and endpoint management. One of the things that we want to be able to do is move more things to the cloud, right? Not just from a Microsoft perspective, But because the more the things that we move into the cloud, we can incorporate it into that intelligent security graph where we're looking at that signaling, that telemetry from all of those places that we're identifying, use that to help drive those security decisions. Also let's look at our devices from a security perspective, right? Are they compliant? What are the users trying to access or store on that device? And then from the employee experience, let's make it easier for them to be secure. Put all of those applications in one place that's managed by that security environment, and make sure that they have what they need to do their job and nothing more, right? That idea of least privilege. Okay, I think that is all we wanted to cover today. There is some resources. We'll make that available as well if you want to read more. The other thing is, I know we covered a lot, but I'm happy to arrange follow-up conversations. You can work with Tony, or I see Scott's on the phone, to help talk about, more in depth what do we mean from this zero trust perspective.